Hello and welcome to Warcraft Daily for today, the 27th of November 2013. So the main thing in today's news is a giant big article, well, yeah, very large post that they wrote about all of the different stat changes that are coming in Warlords of Draenor, and it's actually fantastic. It clears up so many different things, and there's actually a group of secondary stats that I did not even know existed, so pretty cool. And then finally I'll round it off by talking about WoW being cheap until the 1st of January 2014. Anyway, let's talk about this. So there's been a massive post on the forums about gear changes in Warlords of Draenor. First of all, it is split into armor and then non-armor. Armor includes head, shoulders, chest, legs, glove, belt, boots, and bracers. And finally, non-armor is weapons, rings, cloaks, necklaces, and trinkets. So yeah, let's get into the armor first. They said that they want all new content to be a higher item level and more effective than the older content. That makes perfect sense to me. And they also said that they are changing primary stats to make pieces more universal. Overall, this should mean the groups find more useful gear, so there'll be less disenchanting of, say, agility mail or intellect plate. That said, nearly every group has about 17 hunters in it anyway, so the agility mail was never really a giant problem. But definitely int plate, massive issue for people who didn't have a holy paladin. Now, primary stats. So these are going to be changed so that they are based on your current spec, meaning that the primary stat on your gear will change based on your spec. So if you're holy and you go into red, it will move from intellect to strength. And this will likely be something that only applies to Warlords of Draenor gear. The reason for that is just technical issues with sort of retroactively applying it to other gear. Armor will always have some sort of stamina and armor value, so I suppose that's fair enough. So the three primary stats will be strength, intellect, and agility. On plate you will find strength and intellect. On mail and leather you will find agility and intellect, and finally cloth will be intellect only. Also casters get int, and melee or tank get strength and agility, so essentially that's all the stuff that makes sense, and it will just switch up based on the spec that you're currently in. Now for secondary stats, so these will allow for a little bit more customization and differentiation between the different specs within a class. Secondary stats will not change based on specs, so you're stuck with whatever you have. These include the ones we know of in haste, crit, and mastery. Also, hit, expertise, dodge, and parry are completely gone from the game. Secondary stats on armor will no longer include spirit or bonus armor. Now these will be on the non-armor pieces of gear, but bonus armor will not be on your main armor pieces. The reason these are being reserved is because they're really more tank or healer specific things, and they want to allow tanks and healers to have more specific secondary gear, so there's not as much competition within groups. In addition to this, there are also several new secondary stats. Now these do seem to be less firm in terms of what they will be specifically, but the ones they named were Readiness, Amplify, and Multi-Strike. Readiness will increase your cooldown recovery rate. Amplify will give you a flat bonus percentage of stats. So for example, if you had 10% Amplify, this would mean that 1000 haste is actually 1100 haste. And finally, Multi-Strike means that each ability has 2 chances of hitting a target, and with the second time being 30% damage. And it does the damage twice, but not the cast. So say if it was a Mind Blast, you would only get the 1 Shadow Orb from that. Overall, this seems like a pretty good way of making more interesting and varied stats that actually affect your gameplay in a little bit more of an active way than some of the previous ones we had. So yeah, I think it's quite fun overall. Now there's also 3 different bonus things that can appear in gear. First of all, there is the higher item level thing, which is essentially Warforged, and the implementation will be the same as we know it today, so that's fair enough. Secondly, there's also going to be gem sockets. Unlike the gem sockets today, these will be more rare and they'll also be more powerful. They're also considering making it so that they require the right color of gem for the socket, so that I suppose that just locks things down a little bit more. Also, there's going to be no socket bonuses, and all gems will grant secondary stats. So perhaps even if the socket you get's not a good color, the secondary stats, there's quite a few of them now, and they all seem to be more interesting, so there will definitely be something that's at least in some way useful. It's not like you're being forced to gem hit when you're already capped. That won't be an issue anymore. Finally, there's also tertiary stats, and these are actually quite cool. The examples they gave were increased movement speed, one called sturdiness, I'm not too sure what that is, one called avoidance, which is less AoE damage, and then cleave, with cleave being similar to some of the multi-target Siege of Orgrimmar things. It's definitely important to note that these are going to be rather rare, these tertiary stats or bonuses or Warforged sort of stuff. they're going to be roughly a 10% chance for dropping a piece of gear with one of these additional stats. So as you can imagine, getting all three, that is a 10% chance, then a 10% chance, and then a 10% chance. Assuming that, actually no, that might be even rarer, because obviously if you already have one, then, you know, the roll chance will be less for the subsequent ones. So yeah, definitely very rare. Getting all three of these will be just ridiculous. It might be like a 1% overall drop rate or something. It'll be very low. So building a set of something like, say, movement speed gear or something like that, really, really hard, because this stuff's quite rare. But what it does do is constantly gives you an interesting thing to strive for, but the randomness means that perhaps it's not as farmable. Anyway, since it is in raid content, what it really means that, say a 6-month tier, I'd say at month 4 or 5, there's still cool shit that you can get, so it keeps, I guess it keeps the rewarding aspect of raiding. A lot of the times people, they say clear 12 out of 14 in Siege of Orgrimmar, and it's getting really boring having to work back up each week, and even maybe extending the lockouts isn't helping because people aren't getting that much gear. Well, this means that there's always something more interesting to strive for. Finally, on the topic of set bonuses, they said that they will be changing by spec, and this means that each spec can have its own set bonus, with the example being, say, survival and marksmanship hunters can have set bonuses that are completely tailored to the spec. Now this is really nice because it just lets them make more interesting set bonuses for us, so that's all good. Also, they said that tier sets will work the same as they do today, so there will be tier bits of gear and non-tier bits of gear, so it's all fair enough if you ask me. Now for the non-armor pieces, this includes weapons, rings, cloaks, necks, and trinkets. These will, in general, not have primary stats. There might be some exceptions to that rule, but in general, no primaries. They may have attack power or spell power on them. This is just to make them a little bit more universal. They will, yes, they want to have primary stats on weapons though, that's the one exception to that rule, because they kind of want to make weapons feel special. And I think that's fair enough. Weapons are more iconic, they are very prominent in your character, so having a nice stat bonus on them is always very good. They finally said that many of these non-armor items will have stamina, so yeah, there's the basics. Now these can have secondary stats, and unlike armor, unlike the armor things, they can have spirit and bonus armor, so if you're a healer or a tank, this is when you can really specialize what kind of secondary stats you want. Of course, the reason why they've done this is because Spirit is healer only, and armor is tank only, bonus armor is tank only, so this alleviates any competition between them and DPS players for pieces of gear they might want, and that's fair enough. If you have a 15-person raid group, and all the DPS and the 2 tanks, wherever, are rolling on the same thing, well, the chances are then, like on average, perhaps your tanks won't get geared up as fast. So I think this is all fair enough. Also, they said that the stats that healers and tanks want are a little bit more subjective than it is for DPS, like for DPS classes, so this provides a little bit more freedom. So for an example, one tank might want to stack haste while another might prefer bonus armor. They also said that you, if you were to, say, stack spirit and everything, it would probably not be crazy efficient, so I don't know, that was just a little thing they threw in there. And finally, well, not finally, but they said the bonus armor fills a niche that dodge and parry did today, and they like tanks avoiding attacks, but they don't really think it was a very fun part of gearing. From what I understand, because of diminishing returns, it was really just juggling the 2 of them so that they're roughly equal, and overall it just seemed a little bit janky to me, so perhaps this is a good thing. Tanks, let me know what you think. And finally, they said that these can have one of the additional bonus things, like Warforged tertiary stats, or gems. So, there you go, lots of feckin' armor. Overall, I think this is great. The new stats seem like they're much more fun than what they have been, like the current system that they are replacing. Also, it alleviates some loot balance issues with Agility Mail and Intellect Plate, which is always good. It's a bit of a bummer when stuff drops that just gets disenchanted because no one can even equip the damn thing. And while one set of armor will be best, not be best in slot for both specs, I think it at least means that you're viable in both. For example, if you're a Holy Paladin, you will at least be serviceable in Ret because of the way all your primary stats will switch over. So this means if you want to go and kill some mobs or something, it'll make your day-to-day life a little bit easier, so I think that's overall quite good for gameplay. Also, the new tertiary stats could, in my opinion, perhaps cause some balance issues. Perhaps things like lifesteal or avoidance might be a little bit OP for tanks, but I'm sure they'll find a way to pull this off. I think they know that this is a large concern for balance, so I don't think they'll mess it up. Hey, it's me from the future. Essentially, a few hours after I recorded this, they added some updates, so I think I may as well just go back and kind of retcon it into the show. So, the things that they cleared up were just some lingering questions and things like that were in the main forum thread. Now, what they said is the PvP gear will have more stats to choose from, and less worrying about hit caps, and the PvP power will likely still exist to ensure that PvP gear is powerful, but without being more powerful than PvE gear in PvE. Additionally, some PvP changes, PvP changes are beyond the scope of this discussion, but they do want to make sure that PvE gear does not strip PvP gear for world PvP. Sentences like that are just really hard to say. So, basically, Ashran is a thing, and what could happen, which I could imagine being a bit of an issue, is that when you go into Ashran in your nice, high-end raiding gear, then comparatively, maybe the PvP people don't have the edge that they should, and I'm of the opinion that the PvP people absolutely should have an edge. Now, the other method of doing Ashran is that our gear is normalized down to an item level in Ashran, so that would be the equivalent of, say, going into a battleground now with really high-end PvE gear, and your high-end PvE gear just gets normalized down to, like, whatever item level it is. I think that could make sense, but yeah, it's a bit of a hard one. Still, I very much hope that they don't mess up the balance between the two different kinds of gear, especially in Ashran, because Ashran could really just be ruined by a group of people going around in heroic raid gear, well, mythic raid gear, and destroying everyone. That wouldn't be fun. Next up, for healers, they said that they will have increased baseline regen on their character, and each point of spirit will have higher regeneration effects. And since Spirit is useless to DPS specs, min-maxers will want to get an alternate set of gear for the few slots that actually can have Spirit. So while you'll probably be okay with your main armor slots, because of just the way Spirit isn't on them and the way they're designed, for your offset, like your off-armor things, like your cloak and your neck and your rings, you will probably want to have a DPS set. But still, the most important thing about this is it means that if you're a healer and you want to go and quest or do something like that, then you're far more able to than you used to be. Also, they said that having a random element keeps gear kind of looking exciting for longer, instead of just turning into a checklist that you tick off one by one slowly, which is a good thing. They said that too much random stuff can be frustrating, hence they have bad luck protection for personal loot and for bonus rules. I'd imagine they'll tweak that a little bit more so that just so that some of the extreme bad luck that people are seeing is removed. The really extreme bad luck is removed. One thing I'll definitely say, and this is a fact from Blizzard, they haven't said the exact numbers for this because they want to keep it a little bit more ambiguous in the background, but they said that anyone who says that they did 10 to 15 bosses with no drop is actually lying, because the system will give them a guaranteed drop. So that's interesting anyway. The additional bonuses are mainly just there to provide a bit more of an interesting long tail to gearing. They ensure that you're able to fill slots reasonably quickly, so you're not gimped and, say if you're a hunter, you're stuck with a really shitty gun. But instead, what's going to happen is that actually getting the perfect items with some nice stats is going to be quite rare and isn't a foregone conclusion. So while you may gear up initially rather quickly, there's always not always, but there is going to be a little bit of room at the top to keep on getting new gear. They didn't like the way that often you would, say, get your 2 bits of gear from a boss, and then you'd never really want to do that boss again, but you'd kind of still have to be dragged through it anyway. Well, now that there's the 3 different types of things and sockets, the Warforged equivalent, and tertiary stats, you might have a reason to go back through that boss again, which is kind of interesting, and I suppose pretty cool. They also said that the vast majority of raid gear will have predetermined secondary stats, but there will still be some Timeless Isle or Throne of Thunder style exceptions, where, like, there's a bit of a random roll in the secondary stats, which, I mean, okay, whatever, I don't particularly care. And they also finally said that they are planning on changing up a few masteries, but there are no major sweeping changes. Anyway, that's it for the discussion on gear. Overall, I think it was all kind of good. I'm happy to have some of this stuff cleared up. Anyway, let's move on to the next topic. Now, finally in today's news, cheap World of Warcraft. Now, this is not active in the USA site yet, and yeah, it's very, very damn good though. On the WoW UK store, World of Warcraft, that's everything up until Cataclysm inclusive, is £4, and that comes with the free month. And everything, yes, and then Mists of Pandaria is £7, so for the European people, that's €5 for World of Warcraft, and €10 for Mists of Pandaria. I'm not too sure what that will mean in terms of dollars, although often there is a 1-to-1 dollar to euro ratio, so it could be $5 and $10. Really sucks for the European people, but hey, still, I think this is really great. That's damn cheap. You're getting a lot of game, even if you only play it for not for 4 months, for 1 month. That £4 is still a very good deal. It's very competitive. So overall, I think this is great. In combination with the new Recruit a Friend system, this is probably going to be a rather effective marketing push, which is fine. Honestly, I wish they kept the pricing like this to get more people through the door. Either that, or perhaps they made it so that you get a free month included with getting Mists of Pandaria. I think that would be nice, and it would be a good incentive to keep people in for a bit longer. This is just the pure business side of me talking, though. Still, cheap World of Warcraft, and that's always a good thing. Anyway, that's it for today's show. If I seem a little bit incoherent, it's because there's a ridiculous amount of stats and numbers, and not numbers, just like informational things to get through, and it's 1 AM, so yeah, suck on that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.